The janitor moved quietly through the glass-walled corridors long after most of the office lights had gone dark. At this hour, the building felt different. During the day, it was loud with ambition keyboards clicking like machine guns, voices pitching ideas worth millions, polished shoes walking fast like time itself was expensive. But at night it belonged to him. His mop glided across marble floors that reflected the city lights outside. The skyline of Chicago glowing like a promise no one had kept for him yet. His name was Elias Moreno. At least that's what the badge clipped to his faded uniform said. Most people never looked close enough to read it. To them, he was just the janitor, a background detail. A moving object you stepped around without thinking. Elias had learned early in life that invisibility could be a form of protection. He paused near the executive floor, adjusting the strap of his cleaning cart. The silence was broken by voices coming from the large conference room at the end of the hall. The glass door was half open, light spilling into the corridor like a stage spotlight inside. A small group of executives sat around a long table. At the head was Richard Halstead, CEO of Halstead Global Technologies. 61 years old. Net worth in the hundreds of millions. Known in business magazines as ruthless, brilliant, and emotionally unavailable. The kind of man who shook hands like he was measuring your worth through your grip. They were arguing, No, Richard said, rubbing his temples. We cannot present this in Frankfurt like this. The German partners will tear it apart. One of the executives sighed. We've tried adjusting the numbers, but the legal phrasing in the draft contract is complicated. Another added, and the Japanese investors are asking for a revised proposal by tomorrow morning. In Japanese. Silence fell. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. So let me get this straight. We're about to lose a multi-billion-dollar deal because no one here can properly communicate with our international partners? No one answered. Outside, Elias stood still. His hand tightened slightly around the mop handle. He hadn't meant to listen. He never did. But the words pulled at him, tugged at something deep and familiar. Inside the room, one executive spoke cautiously. We could outsource translation, but legal nuances. It's risky. Risky? Richard snapped. This entire company is built on risk. Elias took a step forward before he realized he was moving. Then he stopped. He knew better. He turned his cart slightly, pretending to focus on a scuff mark near the wall. When suddenly, in Frankfurt, Richard continued, they'll expect precise German, not this watered-down English version. And Tokyo don't even get me started. One wrong phrase and we insult someone's grandfather. Elias spoke without thinking. The clause in Section 7 would be considered disrespectful in formal Japanese business language. It implies distrust? The room froze. Every head turned toward the door. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Richard stared at him through the glass. Eyes narrowed. What did you just say? Elias swallowed. His accent softened his words, but his English was clear. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt. Come in, Richard said slowly. Elias hesitated, then pushed the door open. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor. He felt suddenly very aware of his uniform, the smell of cleaning solution, the way he didn't belong in a room like this. Richard folded his hands. You said Section 7 would be disrespectful in Japanese. Why? Elias glanced at the document on the table. He recognized the layout immediately. Legal language was universal in its structure, if not its words. In Japanese business culture, Elias said carefully, directly stating penalties before establishing mutual trust is seen as hostile. The sentence structure suggests suspicion. It would be better to reframe it as shared responsibility. One executive laughed nervously. And how would you know that? Elias didn't look at him. He looked at Richard. Because that's how it's written in Japanese contracts when respect is intended. Richard's voice dropped. You speak Japanese? Yes, sir. A pause. German? Yes. French? Yes. A few executives exchanged looks. Richard leaned forward. How many languages do you speak? Elias hesitated. He hadn't answered that question in years. Not honestly. 9, he said. The silence that followed felt heavier than any insult. One executive scoffed. This is a joke. Richard didn't smile. Name them. Elias took a breath. English, Spanish, German, French, Japanese, Mandarin, Portuguese, Arabic, Russian. Richard's jaw tightened. Say something in German? One executive challenged. Elias turned slightly toward Richard and said, in flawless, formal German, if we present the contract as it is, they will see it as inflexible and arrogant. A minor revision would signal cooperation rather than control. The executive's face went pale. Japanese, another said quickly. Elias didn't hesitate. His Japanese was precise, respectful, and business appropriate. Not casual. Not textbook, real. Richard slowly stood up. What is your name? He asked. Elias Moreno, sir, and you work here as a janitor. Richard studied him for a long moment. Not like an employer looks at an employee, like a man reevaluating reality. Sit down, Richard said. Elias didn't move. That wasn't a suggestion. Elias sat. The executives looked uncomfortable, like the rules of the room had just shifted, and no one had updated the manual. Richard slid the contract toward Elias. Show us how you'd fix it. In German and Japanese. Elias read silently. His eyes moved fast. Faster than they should have. He picked up a pen. What followed felt unreal. He rewrote sentences, adjusted phrasing, explained cultural implications with calm authority. He switched languages mid-sentence without effort. German legal precision. Japanese politeness levels. Mandarin formality distinctions. No one interrupted him. When he finished, Richard exhaled slowly. Where did you learn this? Elias capped the pen. Life. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Richard nodded once. You're done cleaning for tonight. Elias blinked. Sir? Go home. Tomorrow morning I want you back here. 8 a.m. conference room A. I'm scheduled for... You're scheduled to be here. Elias stood, unsure whether to say thank you or apologize. As he left, he felt eyes on his back. Not dismissive this time, curious, uneasy. That night, Elias sat in his small apartment, the city noise humming through thin walls. He stared at the ceiling, memories surfacing uninvited. Classrooms in different countries. Books borrowed, never owned. A childhood spent moving. A father who believed knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you. A mother who died too early. A life that had taken a wrong turn not because of lack of ability, but lack of access. At 8 a.m. sharp, Elias stood outside conference room A in the same uniform. Inside waited Richard, alone. Sit. Richard said. Elias did. Richard didn't waste time. You're overqualified for your job. Elias smiled faintly. I know. Why are you here? Because talent doesn't always get invited in, Elias said. Sometimes it sneaks through the back door with a mop. Richard studied him, then nodded slowly. You saved us yesterday, Richard said. Not just money, reputation. Elias said nothing. I ran a background check, Richard continued. Your education records are fragmented. Different countries, scholarships, then nothing. Elias looked down. Why did you disappear? Richard asked. Because at some point, Elias said quietly, being brilliant isn't enough if you don't belong to the right world. Richard leaned back. You belong here now. And that was the moment everything began to change. But what no one in that building knew, not Richard, not the executives, not the security guards who still barely noticed Elias walk past, was that the 9 languages were the least impressive thing about him, and the reason he was cleaning that building had nothing to do with money. The room went silent as Elias stepped forward. I won't take the CEO chair, he said calmly. I never wanted power. He placed his janitor badge on the table. I wanted proof. The screen lit up behind him, early patents, original contracts, and emails that carried his name. The real architect of the company had been standing among them all along. Unnoticed, Richard's face drained of color. The investors didn't hesitate. Within minutes, Richard was removed. The board turned to Elias with an offer that would have changed his life forever. Elias smiled and shook his head. You already taught me something, he said. Titles don't define value. Character does. He walked out of the room in the same uniform he walked in with. Days later, the company announced sweeping changes education programs, fair promotions, and respect for every worker, no matter their role. Months passed. One evening, Richard stood outside the building he once ruled. Through the glass he saw Elias laughing with employees, teaching them words in different languages. Elias looked up once, met Richard's eyes, then turned away. The truth hit Richard. Like a final blow, the most powerful man in the room had never been the one at the top. It was the one everyone underestimated. Subscribe The Black Shadow for more interesting stories.